Hello everyone and welcome to your Islamic Practices revision session / Loom video. The aim of this session is for us to be able to go through in under about half an hour all of the Islamic Practices unit, starting with the 5 pillars of Islam all the way down to Jihad, the 2 Eids and Ashura and the 10 obligatory acts, which of course has a specific focus on Shia Islam. The session is going to be sort of split into two. So the first half of the session we will analyse what the 5 pillars are, the importance of them and the dynamics and links they have with one another. And then the second half we will look from lesson 6 onwards up to the 10 obligatory acts and how that all intertwines with Islamic practices as well for the purpose of the exam. So, before we even consider the different 5 pillars of Sunni Islam, you need to be able to understand for the exam what the 5 pillars are in general for Muslims. Okay, so the 5 pillars essentially are building blocks for how a Muslim should worship Allah through the acts of Hajj, Zakah, Shahadah, Salah, and Sawm. Okay, and these actions are all ibadah. Okay, ibadah, acts of worship carried out with the intention of obeying God. So, just how when you have a structural building, the pillar keeps the building up, for a lot of Muslims, their faith is held up through these 5 different acts. So, when you were learning about these pillars in lesson, your teacher would have taught it to you in a certain order. And the first one that you would have learned about is Shahadah. Shahadah is essentially all the Islamic practices summarized into one sentence, which is that everything that they do is based on the fact that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. This also further reinstates that, like Christianity, Islam is a monotheistic religion, meaning that they only believe in one God. The Shahada would therefore deny the Christian belief in the Trinity of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, as you are aware, Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims have different versions of the Shahada. Okay, so Sunni Muslims, it is there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and Shia Muslims is that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and Ali is the friend of Allah. So if you flick back through your Islamic belief notes, you will understand who Ali was and why exactly Shia Muslims add him at the end of their Shahada and their declaration of faith. In the next slide, we're going to examine what times the Shahada is said for Muslims, because you could easily get a 5 marker that says describe the importance of Shahada for a Muslim, and you will be able to you have to know not just what the Shahada is for Sunnis and Shias, but also the different occasions in a Muslim's life when the Shahada will be recited. For Muslims, the word of the Shahada are heard throughout the day in countless aspects of their lives, from hearing it in the prayer, to doing it themselves in their 5 daily prayers, hearing it in the mosques. They're also the first words that are whispered into a newborn baby's ear, at a time of conversion, in a funeral, in weddings, all these different aspects of a Muslim's life that you have already learnt about in paper 1 has the Shahada declared in it. Again, just to reiterate, the Shahada denies any form of any other God and only Allah and Muhammad as his messenger, or for Shias, Ali is also the friend of Allah. Now, one of the biggest things and the biggest debates surrounding the Shahada is, of course, the conversion. So in the next section of this topic, we're going to be looking at, can the Shahada count in a conversion of as you guys already know, a revert to Islam? So when you had debates with your teachers in class, one of the things that they may have said is, can somebody become Muslim just by saying the Shahada? Okay, and the answer to that is no, because you must have the right intention, niyyah, which is a specialist terminology. So yes, all someone has to do to convert / revert to Islam is to say the Shahada 3 times in front of a witness. However, you reciting it 3 times in the classroom without any intention does not mean that you have automatically become Muslim, okay? So there are no ceremonies or rituals to welcome new believers to Islam, but all one needs to do to become a Muslim is, of course, recite the Shahada. The second pillar of Islam is Salah, and this is the practice of prayer. You need to be able to say in an exam that the second pillar is Salah and not prayer, and try to get used to using these Arabic terminologies. Okay, so it is a duty for all Muslims, Sunnis specifically, pray 5 times a day and worship Allah. And a source of wisdom for this, which is very easy to remember, is indeed prayer prohibits wrongdoing. Muhammad called prayer the pillar of religion, and it reminds them to give thanks to life. Next, we're going to be looking at what these 5 daily prayers are called and when they are prayed in various parts of the day. So, the 5 daily prayers are called Fajr, Zuhur, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. You need to be able to know how to spell these roughly for the purpose of the exam. The Fajr prayer is just after dawn. The Zuhur prayer is just after midday. The Asr prayer is in the late afternoon. The Maghrib prayer is just after sunset. And the Isha prayer is after dark. But of course, for Muslims living in Britain, the actual times of these will change throughout the year because, the clocks go forward or the clocks go back, and also it depends on the time of the year. So at the moment, it's summertime and Fajr is about at 3:30 in the morning. But once you get into winter time, Fajr is around 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so it all just depends on the season and the time of the year when these prayers will be. So we have looked at what Muslims pray. Now we're going to look at where Muslims pray. Okay, so just how when you looked at where Muslims get married, Muslims can literally pray anywhere. They can pray in the mosque, they can pray in the streets, they can pray at home, and obviously you're already aware from the Gender Equality Unit from paper 1 that loads of Muslim women are encouraged to pray at home, while loads of Muslim men are encouraged to pray more in congregation and in public worship. How Muslims pray. So before they start their Salah, they of course do a cleansing ritual called wudu, where they follow specific instructions to clean themselves, and I have included a link to that video for you guys to watch for the purpose of your revision in your own time. And then when they actually begin the prayer, for the purpose of the exam, you don't need to know exactly the actions that they do, but you need to know that they face themselves towards the Kaaba. This is known as the Qibla, so it's the place of Muslim pilgrimage, and they perform rak'ahs, which is a sequence of movements following a set pattern, which makes up the prayer routine. Okay, so in Fajr you might have 4 rak'ats, and in Maghrib you might have 5 rak'ats. Okay, so the different prayers during the day require a different number of rak'ahs, and also in special times during Ramadan you might have extra rak'ahs, which we will look at when we go on to the Ramadan unit. Right, yeah, 10, you're doing really well. We are now moving on to our third pillar, which is Zakah. So this is when Muslims give 2.5% of their wealth every year. You already know this from when you studied charities in Unit 4 of Human Rights. And it is basically something, this 2.5% is usually something that is given during Ramadan. For a lot of Muslims, it's just money. And for other Muslims, it might be property or gold or land. Or even in some poorer Muslim countries, sometimes it might be 2.5% of their livestock or the animals that they have. Okay, so the source of wisdom for this is give zakah, whatever good you put forward for yourselves, you will find in with Allah. And another one that a lot of you guys might know is that righteousness means zakah. Okay, so being a religious person means to give zakah. So the fourth and second to last pillar of Islam is Sawm, which is of course Ramadan. But when you're discussing this in an exam, you will say the fourth pillar is Sawm, not the fourth pillar of Islam is Ramadan. Okay, so this is the practice of fasting. So for many Muslims, this is the holiest month of the year, which we will look at in much more detail in a very short while. And it is also believed to be the month in which the Prophet Muhammad received the first verses of the Quran revealed to him by God. So in the Quran, it basically says, "Oh, you who believes, fasting is prescribed for you." Okay, so this is something that you should have, that Allah predestined for you to do before you were even born, and it's a form of self-control. It's a form of self-control, but also the timings of when Ramadan is, like prayer, will vary throughout the year. Okay, so at the moment Ramadan was in April, but a few years back it was bang in the middle of the summer, and by a certain year people are predicting that Ramadan is actually going to fall right in line with Christmas and the New Year. So there will be a year where there'll be 2 periods of Ramadan. There's also a misconception that when Muslims fast and take part in the fourth pillar of Sawm, that all they're doing is just starving their self from food. Okay, but of course water's included in this, but also other bad habits like smoking, you can't take medication, you can't have sex. Okay, all of this is the deliberate control of the body, and Muslims are expected to refrain from eating, drinking, water, smoking, sexual intercourse from dawn to dusk for the period of 29/30 days. And the whole purpose of this is to be able to train our minds and abstain from evil thoughts, harmful actions, and unkind speech in order to get the best outcome from it, and also at the same time linking into pillar 3, giving zakah, giving charity, understanding how poor people feel. So what I'm going to do is show you this source of wisdom now about fasting, and when it was discussed quite a lot in detail in the Quran. Now, no one is telling you to remember this source of wisdom word for word, but if you look at this source of wisdom, you can also almost pick out who God has prescribed to fast and who God has prescribed to not fast. Okay, so Allah has made it very clear in the Quran that the people who cannot fast are a traveller, a sick person, a pregnant woman, a girl on her period cycle, those with other health conditions like diabetes, young children, the elderly, and anybody else that will be vulnerable or will have underlying medical conditions that means they cannot fast. However, these people can still attend services and prayers at the mosque. And anyone who can fast is, of course, any one of those people that does not fall in the category on the right. The final pillar of Islam is Hajj. Okay, now this is the only pillar of Islam that Muslims don't have to perform, and it is compulsory for those who are able to make the journey. The Hajj, like Walsingham and Teze, is the religious pilgrimage to Mecca for a Muslim. The Quran commands it as a duty for those who have enough money to leave their homes for a lengthy period or are physically and mentally fit enough to carry out to this. But just to reiterate, it is the only pillar of Islam that Muslims don't have to follow. Hajj happens before the celebration of Qurbani Eid, which is the second Eid Muslims celebrate. Again, we will have a whole unit on this. However, at any other time of the year, Muslims can go on a shorter version of this pilgrimage called Umrah, or Muslims at any time of the year can go and visit Hajj/Mecca and or Medina, the home of Prophet Muhammad as well. So one thing that you need to know is that, like we learnt with Salah, there is preparations before Hajj, just how there's preparations before Salah. So on arriving in Makkah, pilgrims enter a state of ihram, which is purity. So they put away their normal clothes and they put on special garments. So it's usually some sort of white clothes, like a cloth style, very plain, very simple. Face is uncovered, and the all white can show unity, as you cannot tell rich from poor. And also, I think if you remember quite clearly, when you did human rights and you learned about Malcolm X, you would have spoken about with your teacher how Malcolm X felt when he travelled to his pilgrimage in Makkah and his unique journey. And he mentions as well this whole idea of wearing white, and you can't tell who's black, who's white, you can't tell who's rich, poor, disabled, old, young, because you're all one once you get there. Okay, and it's all following in line with what all religions believe in, this whole golden rule. So I have put for you guys here a description outline and a timeline of what the Hajj journey looks like. So this is a knowledge organisers that you can keep, screenshot, save on your phones, write it down. There's a digital copy of this and a paper copy if you would like it. So of course this is the Hajj journey. So you start with doing the tawaf, to shaving your head if you're a man at the completion of the Hajj. Okay, and again you would have looked at with your teacher what the Umrah might have looked at like as well. So for the purpose of the exam, try to remember 3 to 4 of the little bits and bobs that happen during Hajj, and what they symbolize. So for example, when you are at the Zamzam well, it remembers the spring of the water revealed to the Prophet Ibrahim's wife Hajar by the angel. Okay, so this time when she was thirsty, and then you go to the well, and just imagine what it would be like if you were a Muslim at the time and how you would be feeling having this well from this water that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Excellent, year 10. We have come to the second half of our lesson now. So we have covered all of the 5 pillars of Islam, which are Shahadah, Salah, Zakah, Sawm and Hajj. Learn them and learn them well. And also remember that you could easily, one of the advanced informations this year was actually 5 pillars. So you could be given a question, or such as a statement in a Part D 15 marker that says, Salah is the most important of the 5 pillars, and then you can use the other pillars and link it in to say if Salah is important or least important than the others. Okay, so try to learn all 5 of them well. They work really nicely with the other lessons that we're going to be looking at as well. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to lesson 6/topic 6, which is Jihad. Perhaps after the 10 obligatory acts, the most complicated unit Islamic practices. So make sure you're listening carefully and you're writing down as many notes because you might miss some things. So jihad is basically means struggle, okay? It's both a struggle for faith and a struggle against evil, and there's 2 types of jihad that you would have gone with through with your teachers at the time, okay? So the lesser jihad is, in layman's term, in simple terms, it is about defending Islam from threat, and the greater jihad is about making the effort to be a good Muslim. Okay, so lesser jihad, some people might have a war because they're protecting Islam, and the greater jihad is the war you're having within yourself. Okay, now when I taught this to my students, I said that in history, the lesser jihad, an example of the lesser jihad would have been the Crusades. And a greater jihad would have been, when people weren't free to express their religion and hiding their religion, and that's their struggle with their Lord. Now, in today's society, the lesser jihad, it has, of course, unfortunately become a form of extremism and violence, and the greater jihad in modern Britain could be something about, something as simple as a woman that wears a headscarf not expressing herself, or struggling to wear the headscarf. Okay, so these are all forms of jihad. Okay, should I be praying 5 times a day? I can't give charity. Oh, I'm really struggling to fast. These are all examples of greater jihad, whereas lesser jihad is about defending Islam from threats. Okay, Islam teaches that lesser jihad can never be used to justify terrorist attacks and wars. But unfortunately, you guys, as you guys have learned when you did extremism, this has now become the case. Okay, but if jihad was to ever come up in an exam, you have to be able to talk about both of them together and the opposites of them, and also you need to be able to link them back to the 5 pillars, and also remember that jihad means struggle. So it's a struggle for faith if you're talking about the greater jihad, or struggle against some sort of evil if you're talking about the lesser jihad. All right, moving on to perhaps my favorite topic, which is the Eids. So when you did this in your lesson, you would have learned about Eid al-Adha and then Eid al-Fitr. And I've got this knowledge organizer that breaks it down really nicely, which tells you when is it celebrated, who celebrates it, why is it celebrated, and how is it celebrated. So we'll start with Eid al-Adha. So Eid al-Adha is the festival of sacrifice, okay, and it's also the most important event in the Muslim calendar, and it's also known as the bigger Eid, and it marks the end of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Both Shias and Sunnis celebrate Eid al-Adha, and the reason being, and I'll show you a source of wisdom that can help you support this, is of course to do with Abraham and the sacrifice, or Ibrahim as you would refer to if you were talking about the Islamic version. Okay, so Abraham, you have fulfilled the vision. He turned around and behold, there was a ram. He took it and released his son, and he bent over his son, saying, "Oh, my son, today you have been given to me." So at this time, Muslims remember the story of Ibrahim told in the Quran. Ibrahim was willing to sacrifice his son Ishmael to show his love for God. Just in time, he heard a voice telling him to spare his son and sacrifice a sheep instead. Today, an animal such as a goat, sheep, or cow is killed at Eid al-Adha as part of the commemoration. The meat is shared among family and friends as well as being distributed to the poor. In this story, it's basically saying how the devil came to tempt Ibrahim, but his faith was so strong that Allah actually put the goat in there instead. Okay, and it also symbolizes how each individual has to struggle against sin, and it also shows the omnibenevolence of God. So try to show these specialist terminology. And of course, I'm making a really bad mistake because I keep referring to Allah as God, but of course, when you're in the Islam paper, keep saying Allah instead of God, as the Christianity paper God would be more relevant. And of course, the way they celebrate this, it's a very important occasions for Muslim families, and of course, for the businesses as well, because so much meat is getting prepared in the halal butchers. So gifts are bought, new clothes are made, food is prepared in advance, arrangements are made for the sacrifice. Okay, and remember that when they when they sacrifice the goat or the cow or the lamb or sheep or whatever it is that they're sacrificing, please remember that that they're distributing that meat between the poor. So it's either that they're giving the meat in little meat bags to the poor, or they're cooking it into like a meal or a curry or a stew, and then they're giving it to the poor. Okay, so there's loads of things that happen, and it's very similar to Christmas. Okay, so try to use what you already know about how Christmas is celebrated. It's similar to why Eid is celebrated, you know, with the gift exchange and decorating the house. Some Muslim children don't go to school. In Muslim countries, schools are closed. And obviously prayers and going to prayers. So that's Eid al-Adha done, the bigger Eid. Now let's move on to Eid al-Fitr, which is actually one of the Eids that just recently happened. So Eid al-Fitr is celebrated at the end of Ramadan, okay, and it's on the start of the new month of Shawwal. And it's basically a fresh start, and the lead up to it is obviously 29-30 days compared to Eid al-Adha, which is a bit after. So why do Muslims celebrate Eid al-Fitr? So of course it's to celebrate the fact that they have gotten through all the 30/29 days of fasting, and you're thankful for it. So they might decorate their houses with colourful lights and banners, dress in their finest new clothes, and visit family and friends, go to the mosque. It's really important to remember that as soon as you know how Eid al-Adha is celebrated, Eid al-Fitr is celebrated in the exact same way. They just have different reasons for it. And while we are on the topic of festivals, of course, another festival that your teachers would have dedicated a lesson to, a really fascinating and interesting festival, is Ashura. And this is the festival that you need to understand that Sunnis and Shias celebrated different ways compared to Eid. So Ashura is an important festival for all Muslims, but it's of course more significant in Shia Islam, okay? And it's celebrated or commemorated on the 10th day of Muharram. So Ashura literally means 10th, okay? It falls on the 10th day of the month of Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar. So Sunnis celebrate Ashura by fasting, and it's an occasion to thank Allah for opening up the Red Sea to allow Musa to escape from Egypt. Okay, and this was a very fascinating story that me in the year 10s thought of, because they made instant links to Sunnis' remembrance of this parting of the Red Sea to Passover, which is a Jewish festival. So remember as well that a lot of this stuff is different interpretations of the same event. So Sunnis celebrate Ashura by fasting and allowing and giving thanks to Allah and praying, and they'll do that one day of fasting. However, Shias celebrate it much more differently and in a much more unique way. And for Shias, Ashura is an emotionally charged day remembering the martyrdom of Hussein. Okay, so men and women dress in black and march through the streets, slapping their chests, and they chant. They do reenactment of the death of Hussein, and some men also beat themselves with chains and cut their heads. Okay, so you could easily be given a question that tells you to compare and contrast the different ways Sunnis and Shias celebrate Ashura. In Britain, and this is important to remember as we're doing a very British RE, in Britain, you will not get many parades of Shias celebrating Ashura in London or somewhere else in Britain, because a lot of it's quite banned, because it's quite graphic imagery. However, this does happen in a lot of Muslim countries where people are parading the streets. But it's important to remember that for them, Ashura is a very emotionally charged day. For Shia Muslims, they'll be very sad at home. They'll be in a state of constant mourning, as if Hussein just died the other day. They won't eat their favorite foods. They won't even have their favorite music on. Okay, it's a time of reflection, and it's a lot about blood and losing, and also remembering the betrayal and the death, and it's about a deep sense of injustice. Okay, because of course Hussein was the third imam after his father Ali and his older brother Hassan, so he's still today remembered about the way they basically the rest of the Muslim community turned against him. Okay, and this event was the thing that triggered the split between the Sunni and Shia Muslims, and that continues unfortunately to divide Islam today. But you would have looked at this in a little bit more detail for the Islamic Beliefs Loom, video where the teacher would have gone through it in a much more structured fashion about the difference between Sunni and Shia, because Shias of course believe that Hussein was the right successor to the Prophet Muhammad, but others do not. Well done, Year 10, you're doing really, really well. We have now covered the 3 festivals, which is of course Eid, and Ashura. The reason why there was not a separate lesson on Ramadan is because Sawm, which was lesson 4, and Pillar 4 is the lesson on Ramadan. So if you want to ever make the links there's where you can make them. So we are nearly coming up to the end of our whole Islamic practices revision loom and the GCSE course in general. Well done, you've done very, very well. You should be very proud of yourself. To finish this whole Islamic practices off, we're going to just quickly have a brief recap of the 5 pillars versus the 10 obligatory acts. Okay, so the 5 pillars were Shahadah, prayer, fasting, charity, pilgrimage. Okay, or Zakah, Sawm, Salah, Hajj, Shahadah. Okay, for Shia Islam, they have 10 obligatory acts, which is prayer, so they miss out Shahadah, prayer, fasting, charity, pilgrimage, and then they add Jihad as one of theirs for the 5th. Okay, so we can also just imagine that's replacing Shahadah. Then they've got a few extra ones that you should try to remember for the purpose of the exam. Try to remember at least 2 or 3, as you could easily get a 5 marker or an 8 marker on any of these to say explain 2 obligatory acts. So you've got the 20% tax on yearly earnings, which is the Coombs, directing others towards good, which is bil maruf, forbidding evil, nahil and munkar, expressing love towards God, which is tawala, and then expressing hatred, which is tabara. Okay, so it's quite nice that we end it here because it's honestly summarized the different dynamics between Sunni and Shia Islam and how it can link into things like the way they celebrate Ashura, or the way they have different prayer times, or the difference in their Shahada. So when you look at this, and when you have a look at this knowledge organizer and you look at the differences between them, it's really, really important to acknowledge that this is how the dynamics have begun, and this is a basic starting point for you to know the differences between them and flick back through your Islamic beliefs to know. Okay, so remember, Islamic practices, you've got your 5 pillars of Islam, then you have Jihad, then you have the 2 Eids, then you have Ashura, and then your final topic is the 10 obligatory acts, and that's all you need to revise for that part of the course. And then you need to revise what would have been taught in your Islamic beliefs loom video as well. I hope you found this really helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions, and I wish you the best of luck for the exam.